Have you ever had a moment so strange, so perfectly timed, that it felt like reality itself paused for just a fraction of a second, as if the world blinked in front of your eyes and silently reminded you that something behind the curtain might be watching every move you make, every thought you think, and every step you take? Because once you truly notice something like that, once it sinks into your awareness instead of passing by as just another weird coincidence, you can't unnotice it anymore. And tonight I'm going to show you the glitch that millions of people around the world have experienced in their own lives without ever realizing what it might actually mean. Think about this for a moment. Really let it sink in, because this kind of thing has probably happened to you more times than you can count. You're walking down the street, maybe with your headphones on, or lost in your own thoughts, and suddenly you start thinking about an old friend you haven't talked to in years, someone whose name hasn't crossed your mind in forever, and then, almost like responding directly to that thought, your phone lights up in your hand and their name appears on the screen. Is that just coincidence, or is it something else entirely? We've been trained since we were young to laugh these moments off, to call them random, to label them as chance, luck, or meaningless accidents of the universe. But what if they're not random at all? And what if, instead of being meaningless, they're actually small signals hiding in plain sight? Because here's the uncomfortable truth that most people don't like to sit with for very long. Every system, no matter how perfect it looks from the outside, has flaws under the surface. Every piece of code has bugs that eventually show themselves, and every simulation, no matter how advanced, has glitches that slip through when you least expect them. And the real question isn't whether we might be inside something like that. The real question is how often it slips, and whether you've already seen it happen without realizing what you were looking at. Let's start with something simple, something you experience every single day without thinking twice about it. Patterns. Humans are obsessed with patterns on a level so deep that it's almost instinctive, because we see faces in clouds, we hear hidden messages in static noise, and we connect dots between events that might not even be related, just because our minds are wired to search for meaning in everything around us. But sometimes the patterns we see are too clean, too precise, and too perfectly aligned to ignore. And that's when things start to feel less like imagination and more like something else. Take déjà vu, for example, that eerie, almost chilling feeling that you've lived this exact moment before, where you feel like you know what's about to happen before it happens, like you've seen the same room, heard the same sound, and watched the same words form on someone's lips in a different version of the same moment. Science will tell you it's just your brain misfiring, that it's a memory being filed in the wrong place at the wrong time. But ask yourself this: why does it feel like a memory instead of a mistake? And why does it feel like a replay instead of a simple error? Now think bigger than just your own experience and start thinking on a global scale. Entire groups of people, sometimes millions at once, remembering the same thing in the same way, even when the official records say it never happened that way at all. Logos that people swear used to look different, movie lines that used to be said another way, and historical details that don't match what people clearly remember learning when they were younger. They call this the Mandela Effect, and the explanation is supposed to be mass misremembering. But here's the glitch in that explanation. Why do millions of people misremember the exact same detail in the exact same way, instead of all misremembering it differently? Is that really how memory works? Or is that how a system updates? Imagine a massive online game with millions of players logged in at the same time, all moving around the same digital world. A patch goes live, and one small detail in the environment changes. Some players notice it immediately, some don't notice it at all, and some clearly remember the old version, even though the game now insists this is how it has always been. Now ask yourself, what would happen if reality ran on the same kind of update system. Look at time itself, because time is supposed to be one of the most stable things in the universe. A straight line moving from past to future, tick by tick, second by second, never speeding up and never slowing down. And yet, people all over the world report the same strange sensation, the feeling that days are getting shorter, that weeks disappear in the blink of an eye, and that years pass now the way months used to. You check the clock, and suddenly an hour is gone, and you don't even remember what you did with it. Is that just being busy? Or is it something else happening beneath the surface? Physicists will tell you that time isn't as solid as it feels, that it bends, that it slows down near massive objects, and that at the smallest quantum level, it behaves in ways that barely make sense. In other words, time itself is already glitchy. Now, think about dreams, because every single night, whether you remember it or not, you log out of this world and log into another one that has its own rules, its own physics, and its own strange cast of characters that appear and disappear without explanation. In that world you can fly, you can fall, you can meet people who don't exist in your waking life. And sometimes you wake up with information you didn't have before, like an idea, a solution, or a memory that feels older than you are. What if dreams aren't just stories your brain tells itself to pass the time while you sleep? And what if they're another layer of the same system you're living in right now? Let's talk about probability, because this is where things start to feel almost impossible. What are the odds that you're watching this right now? Not just this video, but that you were born at all, in this exact time period, in this exact body, on this exact planet, in a universe this vast. The numbers are so small that they're almost meaningless, like winning a cosmic lottery billions of times in a row. And yet, here you are, listening to these words, breathing in and out, existing against all statistical logic. Some people call that luck, some people call it fate, and some people call it God. But in a simulation, every character has a spawn point, and every character loads in somewhere. Now let's go even deeper. Technology today is starting to catch up with ideas that used to belong only in science fiction movies and books, because we can now create digital worlds, simulate physics, and build characters that talk, learn, and respond in ways that feel almost human. Right now, there are people working on simulations with billions of individual variables, including weather systems, virtual economies, and even entire digital societies that evolve on their own. And this is just the beginning. So, here's the uncomfortable question you might not like to think about. If we can do this now with the technology we have today, what could something thousands of years ahead of us be capable of doing? Think about that gap for a second. 1,000 years ago, most humans couldn't imagine electricity, couldn't imagine the internet, and couldn't imagine a small device in their pocket that connects them to almost every piece of information on the planet. Now, imagine a civilization 1,000 years ahead of us, and ask yourself what kind of worlds they could build. Now, here's where it gets really strange. Some of the most respected scientists in the world have openly said that the odds of us living in what they call base reality might actually be low, because statistically, if advanced civilizations create simulations, there would be far more simulated worlds than real ones. Meaning, if you were randomly born into a universe, the odds might actually favor it being a simulation instead of the original. That's not just an internet theory. That's a serious academic argument. But let's bring it back to the glitch. Because theory is one thing, and experience is something else entirely. Have you ever noticed repeating numbers in your life? Like 1111 on the clock? Or the same number following you all day on license plates, receipts, and random signs you weren't even looking for. At first, you brush it off, but then it keeps happening, and suddenly you can't help but notice it every time it appears. Is it just your brain paying more attention? Or is it something like a flag in the code? In video games, developers use hidden markers and triggers, little signals that tell the system when something should happen next. What if some of these moments are triggers too? Not for the system, but for you. Now think about this. Have you ever met someone who felt different? Like they walked into your life at the exact moment you needed them, not a second too early and not a second too late. And they said the right things, changed your path in some way. And then, sometimes, they disappeared as suddenly as they arrived, almost like a character whose role in the story is complete. We call these moments coincidences and chance encounters, but in a story, every character has a purpose, even the ones who only show up for one scene. Let's talk about memory again, because your entire life, everything you think you are, exists inside your memory. And if you change the memory, you change the person. Now imagine a system that can edit memory, not just yours, but everyone's. Where one small change, one tiny, rewritten detail could shift the entire story of the world. Would you even notice? Or would you just accept the new version as the way it has always been? Now, here's the part most people don't like to think about, because it feels too big and too uncomfortable. If this is a simulation, then observation matters. In physics, particles behave differently when they're being watched, existing in multiple states at once until someone looks at them and forces them to choose one. Now apply that idea to your life and ask yourself how much of what you experience is shaped by what you pay attention to, what you focus on, and what you expect to happen next. Some people call this manifestation, and some people call it psychology, but in any system, user input always affects the output. So what happens when you change your input? People who've gone through near-death experiences often report the same kinds of things, like a sense of stepping outside the world, seeing it from above, and realizing that reality is thinner and more fragile than it looks. They come back different, less afraid, and less attached to things that used to control them. Almost like they've seen behind the interface. Now let's address the elephant in the room. If this is a simulation, then who's running it? That's the question that makes people uncomfortable, because it touches everything from religion and science to meaning and purpose itself. Some people imagine a future human civilization studying its own past. Some imagine advanced beings running experiments, and some imagine something so far beyond us that we don't even have the words to describe it. But here's the twist. What if the who doesn't matter as much as the why? Why create a universe with both suffering and beauty, with chaos and order, with love and loss woven together in the same story? In games, we create worlds to explore, to learn, and to experience stories. So maybe this is a story too. Now look at your own life like a narrative with its struggles, its turning points, and its moments that felt like everything was about to fall apart right before something changed. In stories, that's called the moment of transformation. So let me ask you something. Where are you in your story right now? Because here's another strange pattern that keeps showing up. People who start questioning reality often report the same thing, that they begin to notice more glitches, more coincidences, and more moments of alignment. Almost like once you start looking for the cracks, they become easier to see. Or maybe, just maybe, the system reacts when a character becomes self-aware. Think about artificial intelligence in movies and books, because there's always a moment when the AI realizes it's inside a program, and that's when everything changes. Now, I'm not saying you're a character in a game, but I am saying this. Your perception shapes your experience more than you've ever been led to believe. And whether this is a simulation or not, that part is real. Let's bring this back to something practical, something you can actually use. If reality is completely stable, then you're limited by it. by rules you can't change and boundaries you can't cross. But if reality is more flexible than it looks, then the limits might not be where you think they are. People who've done extraordinary things often say the same thing, that they stopped seeing the world as fixed and started seeing it as something they could interact with. Not control, but influence, like a player who finally understands the mechanics of the game. Now, here's the part that adds weight to all of this. This isn't just a few people on the internet talking late at night in comment sections, because these ideas are being discussed by physicists, philosophers, and tech leaders. The same people building the very technologies that could one day create worlds like this one. When the people closest to the code start saying reality might be code, it's worth paying attention. So what's the glitch you can't unsee? It's the moment you realize that normal is just a setting, that what you call real is filtered through your senses, your brain, and your expectations. You never experience the world directly. You experience a version of it that your mind creates, a simulation inside your head. So here's the final question I want you to sit with. If your entire experience of reality is already a kind of simulation, how different is that from actually living in one? And if you can't tell the difference, does it change how you live? Because maybe the real glitch isn't in the world around you. Maybe it's in the moment you realize you have more agency, more choice, and more influence than you've ever been taught to believe. Maybe the glitch is awareness itself, and once you see it, once you feel it, and once you start questioning, instead of just accepting everything as it is, you can't unsee it. So the next time something strange happens, a coincidence, a repeating number, or a moment that feels too perfectly timed, don't just scroll past it and don't just laugh it off. Pause, look at it, and ask yourself one simple question. Is this just random? Or is this the system blinking back at me? If this video made you see the world a little differently, stay here, because there are more cracks to explore, more questions to ask, and more layers to peel back. Because once you start looking for the glitch, reality will never look the same again.